Welcome to Aim in Practice, where we talk about life as a practitioner, wellness in general, and what it means to practice. Today I'm talking with Rachel Hooker. Rachel is a registered massage therapist who's been practicing since 2018. She's worked in multidisciplinary clinics as well as yoga studios and is currently operating a blended clinic and mobile massage service. She's completed her Rapid-NFR specialization training and uses myofascial meridians, rapid, acupressure, and Swedish massage techniques in unique combinations to treat chronic and acute pain conditions. And we cover a lot of ground in this episode, as we tend to do, where we talk about all these different modalities she practices, her first experience receiving a massage, and really why she decided to dedicate herself to working with pain. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the episode. So, Rachel, thank you very much for joining me. And as usual, we'll start by just introducing yourself, a little bit about what got you interested in wellness and sort of your journey into the life you're living now.
Well, it was not a place I expected to end up in my life. It's not like I had, I didn't really know what I wanted to do for most of my life. And I was kind of going from one part-time job to another, and one sort of like, oh, I could do this, and oh, no, that's not good, and oh, I have to do that, oh, now I need a full-time job. So anyway, I ended up working at a property management company. I knew the owner and a couple of the big guys there, so that when I applied for an interview, I kind of had an in, and I worked there for about 4 years. And it was a very stressful job. There is just a lot of negative energy, a lot of stress, a lot of, I was always in the middle between the tenant and the owner of the property, negotiating what needed to be done or didn't need to be done, telling the tenant what they had to do, telling the owner what needed to be done. But I wasn't able to make any decisions, which puts you in a really awkward position of being the messenger on both sides, just getting it from both sides. So I knew I had to get out of that. And I was originally looking for something else administrative. But the job market at the time, people with my skill set and education were like thousands of people were applying for the same positions. So I was like, well, I have to think of something else to do. And of course, I had not really even really had many massages or much physical, like manual therapy. But there were the few ones that I had were exceptional. They were wonderful. One of the things they did at my job was they brought a massage therapist in to treat everybody. And that was my actual first massage. It was this little half-hour back massage that they brought this therapist in. And I went into this state of complete euphoria. I'd never had anything like that before. And I was like thinking about the nature of God and man and the universe while I'm getting this massage. And I'm like, wow, what is this? And at the time I had no idea what was going on. But now that I studied this more, I'm like, okay, I understand why my brain was just like, woo, when I got that. But it was a great experience. And there was another time when I had sciatic pain, and I went to my doctor and I said, what's going on? I can't sit down. I can't stand up. I don't know what to do. And she assessed and she's like, well, it seems like sciatica. And well, what should I do? And she says, well, you can wait. I was like, nothing faster than wait. And I had a friend who was doing myofascial release. And I said, what if I got this manual myofascial technique done? Do you think that would help? Is it my muscle or something? And she's like, you could try. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, I'll try. And it took 2 treatments and I was fine. So the first one even was really, everything was like 90% better. There were twinges, and then, we had 2 follow-ups. But by the third one, I was like, I don't think I really need this anymore, but it feels good. So
why not keep going?
Yeah.
Can we backtrack for just a second? Because before we kind of move into our next chat, I want to go back to the that first massage experience.
Oh yeah.
I don't talk to many people who remember their first massage experience seemingly as vivid as you do, right? This whole, oh, like, am I meeting God right now, right? So now that you're in it, you said you kind of understand what that is and what's going on there. And what's been your experience with that now as a practitioner? I mean, we could get into your explanation as to what's happening if you want to go in there, but I'm just curious for you to tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it was just that the atmosphere there was so stressful that to have this really positive experience in that environment was just such a change that it was dramatically better than anything I was experiencing. And also because I was storing all of that stress in my shoulders and my back. Like my shoulders were literally up here all of the time. This is how I sat. So there was that factor. But I think also just knowing now that your emotion and your experiences are kind of trapped in fascia or they're stored in fascia and in the muscle tissue, or maybe just fascia. I'm not sure. I don't think anybody.
I don't know
really
if anybody's quite sure.
No,
But we'll go with fascia.
Sure.
Yeah.
It makes more sense because there's more ground tissue and whatever. But so I know that a lot of stuff that maybe was percolating was like just released all of a sudden and just flooded my brain with endorphins. And I do find that I still get clients who have that kind of an experience. I don't know if it's as vivid. I mean, I have no idea what's going on in people's heads, but I definitely get the people who come out going, you know, where am I?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was mostly, just a surge of endorphins and releasing stuff. And not to say that I wasn't, I've always been a kind of spiritual person. I was never a meditator before, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, but not a formal meditator, but I realized that a lot of these experiences that I'd had were actually meditation experiences, and where I was just in the moment without any awareness of myself, really. So that was...
I like that. I found that, like, for myself, the meditative experience of being in the treatment room is both for the practitioner and the client on the table. Like I found, of course, when I'm on the table, that's my probably within my top 2 favorite forms of meditation is receiving a massage. It's like there are very few things that call my presence as much, just because the physical sensation. It's like, I don't want to miss a single second of this, so I'm going to be as acutely present as I can manage. So yeah, sure, of course, being on the table, but I've also found as a practitioner, when I'm in the room, the more meditative state I get into, or the more of a meditative state I get into, and the more present I am, the better the session is for the client. But also, I come out of that session and I'm like, yeah, that was an hour of meditation for me too, right? Yeah, so I really appreciate how you kind of combine this idea of meditation and treatment.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that I realized when I started massage, I have a friend who teaches meditation, and so he had posted this big thing on Facebook about, come to this retreat or whatever, and we'll study about meditation and all these different things. And I started reading this detailed thing that he had written, and I'm like, oh, I'm meditating while I'm massaging people. Like, this is actually what I'm doing. And I get really into it, and I'm moving energy around. Like, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that was not something that I don't think I was taught that in class. I think that's just something that I was doing. So
yeah, I don't know how a person can teach that. I mean, believe it or not, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this topic of how you help facilitate and teach somebody to be a really good massage therapist. And I'm not entirely sure if it's possible, because quite frankly, the techniques are simple. Like, it doesn't take that long to learn how to do at least the basic techniques. More advanced techniques, sure, but that something special, like what you say, moving energy in the treatment room, I don't know how to teach that. That's something that requires, in my opinion, presence and practice.
yeah, I totally agree. And either you get it or you don't, like, you understand what I'm saying, or you're like, what is she talking about? So
Yep.
No, I don't know.
I think it's the same too for massage students. Like I say this often, and now that I'm out of teaching, I have no problem saying it. When I was a teacher, I would never say this, but I don't care anymore. I could usually tell within the first 1 to 2 weeks if somebody was going to be a good massage therapist. Even if I was teaching them anatomy and physiology, there's just something about the intuitive understanding of the body. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It's just some people got it, some people don't. And I think that's a super important thing when it comes to this profession. It's like, if you got it, follow it. If you don't, maybe pick a different avenue, because you're not serving anybody, right? It's a hard truth, but I think it's an important truth.
Oh, yeah. And I think we do disservice to students who are trying, but aren't going to succeed in that particular modality. Mm-hmm. And then it's sort of taking advantage of them a little bit if we just continue to insist that they keep trying when, those skills are transferable to other industries. So.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Let's talk a little bit about modality, because you said the second part of your journey. The first part was like you got to see God and experience it, and that's beautiful, poetic. But then the second part was more grounded in physiology and pain, and it was myofascial work. So let's talk about your entry into the world of myofascial work and what you found so engaging and interesting about it. Because, of course, there's so many avenues we can go in this world of manual medicine. What really drew you to the world of fascia?
Well, I think part of what it was that particular practitioner, and actually she is an RMT, and I believe she's completed her manual osteopathic courses now, and she's practicing in that field. But she was very influential in actually me choosing massage therapy, and I was always kind of had this in the back of my mind, like I want to focus on fascia. Like I know about this, I learned about this through this experience, and this is kind of where I hope they talk about this, and I hope that we learn something about this. And because to me, that was very dramatic and my doctor's great. She's been my doctor forever, and I don't want to disparage her methods or whatever, but also, this idea that, well, you can either just sit and wait it out or take Tylenol or something, or, or just try throwing your money at some quack is kind of her attitude. And I was like, well, that's odd. And then going to this other person who literally knew exactly what to do. And it wasn't difficult. It wasn't a painful treatment. It wasn't a complicated treatment. I understood. She just basically put my legs into different ranges of motion, and we did resistance. That was it. And it worked. And, just basically PNF stretching, if you know what I mean. That was what it was. Yeah. And it wasn't, and my pain wasn't complicated or long-term or chronic. Nothing was going on. That was completely sufficient. And so I thought, when I became a massage therapist and they were like, oh, in second year, you learn about fascia, I was like, oh yeah, this is great. Can't wait. And then we did all of these techniques about myofascial release and cupping. And we learned how to sort of separate the different muscle fibers that had gotten adhered together, or things like that. And I was thinking, this is wonderful. And then I remember one time, I think it was Mike Dingman, we were learning a lax to stretch technique or something like that. And he was like, well, if you just press right here, and then somebody's like, you can't teach them that. And I'm like, what's going on? Why can't you teach me something? Because it's like a copyrighted technique. It was either ART or Rapid. I'm not sure which one he was referring to at that moment, because I don't remember clearly exactly what it was, but it was like one of these treatments that's like extra that they didn't teach us in college, which is annoying and understandable. as a student and as a practitioner, I get both sides of it, of course. So then I knew that they weren't teaching us everything, right? Like I knew there's more to this. There's definitely something else to go on. And as I began to practice, and as I began my own journey with clients, I was understanding that there were things going on that I wasn't understanding. I was working on them and doing all of the things correctly, but their bodies weren't responding, or their bodies were reverting very quickly to pain. And that frustrated me as a therapist, because I wanted to fix that. That's what I'm here for. Gonna fix ya. And so I guess about 4 or 5 months after I became a massage therapist, I saw an advertisement for Rapid Neurofascial Reset online, and they were making some ridiculous claims. They were saying, well, we can release a frozen shoulder in 1 session. And I'm like, oh, come on. It takes a while, you got to work at it. And sometimes it doesn't work. And, and then they were showing these pictures of people before and after. And I'm like, well, you can make that stuff up. Like, that's not, that can't be real.
That's classic internet hype right there.
Right. Exactly. So then I kind of went, well, here's the thing. I get continuing education credits. I can take the first class, and I'll get my credits. That's all I care about right now. And if it's bunk, I'll know. I'll just go and I'll take the class, and I'll be like, okay, well, this was my credits, whatever. And if it works, great, because this sounds fantastic. And so I went, and then it works. And I don't know what else to say. It's been great. And I've started the 4th course. They've got 4 altogether, and I've started the 4th course with Rapid. And actually, I've taken the core session twice, because I find it confusing, actually, to be honest with you, in some aspects.
Right.
And I just felt like I needed, well, and the first time I took it was December of 2019. So I didn't get much practice, and then my whole brain got fried for a year or so.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Rapid, because I'm so curious about these different trademarked modalities. I have very mixed opinions on trademarking a system of treatment, because so far from all of them that I've ever taken, all a person does is they just combine 2, 3, maybe 4 of the most basic possible techniques, and then they slap their own name on it and they call it good. I'm guilty. I've done the same thing in the past. But what exactly about Rapid do you think makes it so effective?
I think the part that stood out to me is that you're not really concerned with muscle tissue. You're not sitting there trying to manipulate muscles, or trying to separate the muscles, or focusing on myofascial stuff at all. You're really focused on the periosteum, and you're focused on stimulating pain receptors, so it makes it painful. And one of the criticisms that inside of myself, I think, okay, this is a very painful treatment, or it can be a painful treatment. On the other hand, I have found that when you work within someone's pain tolerance, you stimulate the periosteum in specific spots. And no, the technique's not difficult, and it's basically a lax to stretch type of move. But you combine this with movement, and it actually creates a change in how the nervous system is perceiving the feedback from that joint. So I think that's what kind of sets it apart, and it seems very unique to me. Having said that, when I took the acupressure points course and learned all those acupressure points, I found that I would say 80% of the acupressure points were places where I would have performed a Rapid treatment. I was like, yeah, this is a spot. This is a hot spot. This is a hot spot. So
that's what
there's
I like
definitely
about acupressure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah. So like this just really, and I kind of suspected that was going to happen, actually, because by then I'd known enough about, I have an acupuncturist. And of course, I'm paying attention to where they're putting the needles and what they're doing. And so I suspected that I would find that things would be along the same. And we also had talked about meridians, because she had come to me for some work, and I have this habit of talking out my treatment as I'm working on people sometimes. I'm the kind of person who, when I'm doing a math problem, I will have to talk it out to myself to get it right. And same thing with a complicated Rapid treatment. I will say, okay, so right now I'm working on your deep front line, and we are going to do this. And I think what's happening is you're getting a pull from here, so I'll just, and it's affecting, and your breath is really important. So let's take some
That's
deep breaths.
awesome.
And then as I'm talking this out to this acupuncturist, she's like, oh, well, yeah, I would put my needle here, here, and here. And we're talking about the commonalities. And so that kind of got me also interested in acupressure and acupuncture and studying the meridians and the Chinese medicine's approach to physiology. So that's kind of where I'm at right now and why I'm kind of here.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating whenever, because of course I spent the majority of in fact, all of my education was spent in acupuncture realm, right? Even the massage portion of it, I was still steeped in the acupuncture world. And so it became my base way of thinking, like no matter what physiological description I'm working on, and as a Western mind, I definitely think in the language of Western medicine. Nevertheless, there's just this foundation of meridians and acupoints and balancing and the Taoist principles and things like that. And I found it so fascinating that every single continuing education workshop I've ever taken, I can always be like, and this is how it relates to acupressure, or and this is how it relates to what I know as my foundational knowledge. But bias, of course. Nevertheless, I think that's one of my favorite things about this traditional Chinese medicine system. It's like these ancient people, they figured something out, and they called it qi and acupoints and meridians, and now we're calling it trigger points or myofascial hotspots, or what's another one we call it? Neurovascular nodes. Like there's a ton of different terms, but the fact is people have been manipulating the body roughly in the same way for a very, very long time. We're just slapping new labels on it, finding different ways to teach it. And that's the thing that I like. It's like the language of NFR, that works really well for some people. It's like, I get this language. Yes, that speaks to me. Or maybe it doesn't. But the language of acupressure does, or the language of trigger point therapy, or any of these other therapies. It's like, you got to find the language that works for you. And then you can really, dive in and drink the Kool-Aid of whatever particular modality you're into.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I've kind of done the whole thing where I kind of am drawing from all these different disciplines and reading up on different things that maybe I'm not studying formally, but somebody will say something online about, oh, well, I did this and this and this, and I'm like, well, why did you do that? And then I'll go down a little rabbit hole. And then of course, we all have our own sort of way of viewing the world, and we're going to interpret everything that we study through that lens. Like you say, your lens is Chinese medicine, and I do have more of a allopathic lens. I know, because that's just how I am. But I'm also getting a little frustrated with that lens sometimes, and it's changing. And also
and
because
you can blend them, right? Like you can blend them perfectly. You can hold
basically
both of them. Yeah.
I'm definitely on that journey of trying to figure out now which part of this condition do I need to explain to this person and in which way. And I think that also helps because if people understand what is happening in their bodies, they're more likely to participate in home care, and they're more likely to participate in follow-up appointments, and they're more likely to actually feel like they're going to get better, which is really important.
Yeah, getting a client buy-in is super important. And I think education plays a huge role for me. I mean, I don't necessarily talk out my treatments, but I very regularly tell my clients, here's what I'm doing and here's why I'm doing it, and explaining and teaching them, like, this is what's going on in your body. So I think that's very helpful for compliance. Yeah. Can we dig a little bit more into pain?
Yeah.
Because there was a couple of points in the conversation you talked about, like your first experience with myofascial release, you're like, it wasn't painful. And that seemed like a really good thing, the fact that you got this relief without it being painful. But then simultaneously we talk about NFR, and it's like, yeah, it's painful. And you also treat a lot of people in pain. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about everything from, should treatments be painful? Is there a time and a place for it? What is pain? I mean, there's a lot of questions there. So let's start with the first one. Is, what do you think? Like, should a treatment be painful? Is there any benefit to it being painful?
Well, I do think there is a benefit to pain. And one of the benefits to pain is that the body starts to release immune function, and the body starts to release substance P, and the C fibers are being stimulated. And basically, what that does is it creates an environment of controlled inflammation and controlled immune function directly in that area. And if you don't actually reach that point where it hurts, then not all of that is going to be stimulated and released. Because the body needs to have a little nociception in order to release all those substances. And so one of the things about Rapid that I want to just talk about briefly is that I also have a client who does Botox. And he asked me how Rapid works, and I explained it all in great detail. And he said, yeah, that's what Botox does. They basically, except instead of stimulating the pain receptor in the muscle, they shut it down so that the muscle becomes paralyzed. So it's kind of, it's the same, but it's opposite. It's the same site, but I'm doing an opposite thing. And I think that it's important not to shut down the muscle if we can at all avoid it. Because that just leads to a bunch of other problems snowballing from there. So anyway, there's that. But then there's also people who, if you create that painful stimulus, their bodies go into a pain snowball so that it actually is too much. And so you really have to assess, and that's been kind of the focus of the last probably year of my clinic, is assessing, is this a person who is going to respond in a way that it's going to snowball into a big, huge immune pain response where they're systemically aching for days? Or is this a person that's going to, it'll hurt in the localized area that I've been working on, but, by Tuesday morning, you will be fine and you'll be able to move your arm and everything's good. And that's most people. Most people, they have a localized problem. They have something has been injured. It's fairly simple and straightforward, and you work on it and it's uncomfortable. And then the next time they come back, they're like, yeah, it's, I did my push-ups and it was great. And that's wonderful. But there's this minority of people who they come in with the shoulder problem, the same problem. You do your work, and then you follow up with them and say, and I do now always try to follow up with someone a few days after the treatment, say, how are you feeling? Like, what is going on with you right now? And sometimes they're like, yeah, I'm just still in so much pain. And then I'm like, okay, come back in. We'll do a redo, half an hour. I'm just going to calm your nervous system down. Yeah. And that's because I have theories about why that is. And I don't know if they're right or wrong, but I have found that if I follow this kind of, if I follow a line of questioning, then I usually get to the right answer about how their body's going to respond to the treatment and which modality to choose.
That's part of the art of what we do, right? I oftentimes compare wellness practitioners to artists because for some reason it seems to work, but it's like a skilled painter knows the appropriate paintbrush to get the effect they want. They know how to mix the right colors to get the tone they want. And it's ultimately very similar for us as practitioners. It's like we have all these different tools between basic Swedish massage or cross-barber frictions or NFR. And it's like you can't always use the biggest paintbrush to paint the picture. Sometimes you got to be a bit more subtle. And part of the artistry of what we do, I believe, is doing exactly as you said. It's learning how to identify which paintbrush or which tool we need to get the ultimately the effect that we want, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that? Like, what is the process for you?
Well, part of it is I talk to them about their history, and typically when somebody has an injury that has been going on for a very long time, and like years, kind of months, iffy maybe, but I'll get people who are like, I injured this when I was 12 and I have had nothing but problems with it ever since, and they're 50, or people who have injuries, their injury heals, but then the pain moves around. And that's a big one. People with non-specific pain. So they'll be like, my hip is just aching. And I'll be like, was it here? Or is it here? Is it here? And they're like, well, yes, 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 no, yes, yes. Like it's kind of everywhere. And does it hurt when you do this, or does it hurt when well, it just aches. And so those kind of things are clues to me that this is going to require a little bit more finesse and a little more subtlety than than an NFR, just guns blazing kind of thing. The other interesting thing I've noticed is that most people who have gone into kind of that heightened pain state are people who moderate and mild exercise will also put them into that state. So I always ask people if they exercise and whether they, how does that go? And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, like I've been trying to lose weight, and every time I go to the gym, I just, the next day I'm done. I can't do anything, and I'm in pain. And I'm like, okay, this is a big sign that I can't do something really intense for you. Yeah. And sometimes they'll have, the other thing that really I find interesting is they'll either have an autoimmune disorder or they'll have someone in their close family who has one. Yeah. So then I do.
Makes a lot of sense. I just want to touch on to that for a second, because as you're saying, and I'm making this connection. Just the other day, I was looking into DOMS again, delayed onset muscle soreness, and because there hasn't been a really compelling reason why, but I was reading some information by this guy, Dr. Andy Galpin, and he explained in detail what DOMS are, and it turns out DOMS is not muscle damage, and what many people thought is it was fascial damage. It's not that either. If it was muscle damage, it would hurt immediately. If it was fascial damage, it would have a different pattern. It turns out what DOMS is this local swelling inside of the muscle tissue. So there's an increase in pressure, which is why stretching hurts so damn much, because that increases the pressure inside the tissue. So as you're saying this, these patterns, I'm like, well, of course, because what increases pressure within the tissue? Inflammation, by and large. So if you do a treatment, you cause inflammation. They go to the gym, they cause inflammation. Plus the autoimmunity, right? Like potentially there's some sort of underlying inflammatory condition that just makes all of these things harder for their body to handle. And I just wanted to add that and put those pieces together, because I think it's important.
Yeah. And it's been, that kind of realization has come to me in the last 6 months or so, I would say, is that, even if all else is normal. Oh, and the other one is trauma. If they have been through major traumatic problem, like either a physical trauma or an emotional trauma or both, they tend to react more strongly to a treatment as well, for sure. And putting all this together has helped me understand why I have one client who, she's had frozen shoulders so bad that she couldn't even move her arm away from her own side enough for me to get my fingers under there. So I really just worked on the rib cage here until we could get her arm like here. And it took her over a year to really get, enough range to put her arm behind her back and get her arm up, which is really long. That's a really long time. And she was doing not just my therapy, she was also seeing other therapists, and she saw a physiatrist as well. And she's really taken charge of her own healing, doing all the exercises and everything. And it just was a very slow healing process. But she does fit into that category. And when I started treating her, I didn't understand about that. I didn't understand that actually the Rapid was probably too much for her. I probably should have used something lighter. On the other hand, I didn't know what I could use to release a shoulder other than either just, I found massage techniques to be mostly, stretching or massage has been a little bit less effective for that kind of thing. So I was using the thing that's the most effective because it's the best and it's going to work, eventually, soon, it's going to work. And I think now at this point, what I would do is I would start using acupressure. And I think her progress would have gone more quickly if I'd been using the acupressure treatment instead of the Rapid for that particular person.
Yeah. I think that's the nervous system part of it, right? Like I do like that Rapid has the neuro in there. Perhaps it gets a little bit undervalued, but I mean, for me, pretty much everything comes back to nervous system. These days when I teach, one of the first things I teach, and I'm teaching a lot more yoga teachers these days as well, and osteopaths, less so massage therapists, more acupuncturists, but no matter which particular modality I'm teaching, I always start the same way, saying when you walk into a room with a client or a student or whatever, the mentality that I would encourage people to have is these are two nervous systems interacting. Like just forget your ego. You're just a walking nervous system. They're a walking nervous system. How do we get these nervous systems to interact? And when I approach a client that way, it's like sometimes you realize that the mechanics of their body will not be receptive until you work with the nervous system of the body, right? So maybe you do back off from these mechanical fascial techniques. Now, certainly, fascial work affects the nervous system. Not denying that, but I think that you're right in saying there are other techniques sometimes we have to approach before we bring out the big guns, right?
Yeah.
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 Can you tell me a little bit about the 5 W's of pain? Like that's something that you're familiar with.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is something I learned from you, probably in college, and also I think you repeated it in the course. And I think it's helped me because that long acronym that starts with Lord, and I don't remember the rest. I have never been able to ask any client all 15 questions.
Yeah. It's outrageous, isn't it?
I really, yeah, I don't know. And I haven't found that most clients don't appreciate me spending 15 minutes looking at a paper and going, mechanism, how did this happen? So I try to keep it to, the 5 questions of when did this happen? Where is it hurting? Why, do you know why this hurts? And I always get stuck on the why, because people are like, well, it hurts because I heard it. But then there's the people who are like, I don't know why this hurts.
Sometimes they'll get an answer, which is informative in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like when the people have a simple problem, I don't ask it when it seems like a simple sort of cause and effect. I sprained my ankle and now it hurts. Like that's, but I do always ask, is this the first time? Always ask that. And then you will find out, that when they come in with something that sounds simple, they may actually say, yeah, this is just comes and goes and has been a problem for my entire life. And then you're like, okay, this is different. And I think that when you engage someone in those questions, it starts to spark more of a conversation about their pain and understanding what is really going on under the surface of this immediate problem that has bothered them to the point that they've showed up.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to do and I like to get under the surface and talk to people about, what is your lifestyle like? Do you just sit at a desk and go home and watch TV? Or are you a weekend warrior and now you're stressing your body 2 days a week and you're sedentary the other 5? And none of my questions, sometimes people get a little bit defensive when I ask them, so what do you do for activity? And I try to frame it in a way that is like, do you exercise? Because people are like, well, of course I exercise. And I'm like, well, not everybody gets the chance. And I think there's this, I don't remember when I was in my 20s with young kids, people really pushing me to get back to the gym and get back my body or whatever it is. But these days there seems to be this real big push, that people who are in incredibly busy situations, like parents of small children, are being shamed, in fact, and told that if they don't get back to the gym and if they don't get back to these things, then they're not taking care of themselves. And I think that's, if you have the time and the resources to do that, great. But if you don't, you don't. And that's fine. If all you can do for your exercise is put the kid in a stroller and walk around the block a few times, then that's what it is,
Great. Awesome.
Yeah. And so also, you get to assess the level of emotion around exercise and the level of emotion around their pain, the level of emotion around their lifestyle. And that always is going to play into how much pain they're in and whether the pain is going to be resolvable in a couple sessions or whether it's going to linger.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got the what.
Yes.
What happened? Where does it hurt? Why?
How does it hurt? That's an H count, but yeah. So
sneak it in there.
I always sneak it in there. It's the whole or what does it feel like, right? Because people will say, well, it just hurts, and I'm like, Is it a shooting pain? Is it a burning pain? Is it deep? Is it superficial? What is going on? Because if they tell me it's a shooting pain, then I'm going to look for a nerve entrapment or a compression. If they tell me that it's a deep aching throb, I'm going to test them for a potential stress fracture. If they tell me, like just depending on what they tell me, I'm going to assess and say, maybe I shouldn't be working on you if it's a deep, hot pain. Like, that doesn't sound right, especially, in your calf or your arm. Like, I don't think I should work on you. I think you should go to your doctor, which is a hard thing to do, actually, as a practitioner, to say, no, this isn't appropriate right now. You need to actually be assessed for a blood clot, basically. You know what I'm going with that. Yeah. And I had the situation with my dad actually was injured. He had Lyme disease, and he was bit by a tick, and they knew that he was, but they didn't keep the tick. He's in Manitoba, where Lyme disease is a little more prevalent, and they actually admit that it exists. He went to his doctor, and the doctor sent off the blood test and whatever, but he hadn't got any results back. But my dad was starting to lose his balance, and he was starting to lose his strength. And he's the kind of guy that go out and garden every day. And he was at the time 78. So he has a very large garden. He's going out and gardening every single day. And now he's at this point where he's in too much pain. He can't do it. And he's starting to lose his balance and fall. And so he goes to the doctor, and the doctor gives him T3s and poo-poos and says, oh, well, if you're still in pain in a month, come back and we'll see about it. Mm-hmm. And I listened to my dad describe what was going on. And he says he has this deep aching pain in his leg, in his thigh. And I'm like, and I've treated his thighs before, so I know, like, this isn't new. And he has a bunch of varicose veins in that leg and all of these different things. And I'm like, right. I think you have blood clots. Like, Dad, you need to go back to the doctor and tell him to do an ultrasound, because I think I think that sounds what, and I said either that or a compression fracture somewhere, and his back was hurting as well in the same kind of way. And I'm like, yeah, you need an ultrasound, you need x-rays, you need something. Mm-hmm. And the doctor just absolutely refused to listen to him, refused to send him for any testing. And then it came to the point where I got in my car and I drove to Manitoba, because I was like, this is ridiculous. You clearly have a major problem. And he was, he fell, and neighbors had to come help him get back up, because my mom is 5'2" and 90 pounds soaking wet. She's not helping him up. And, anyway, so he eventually went to the hospital and actually had to be taken there in an ambulance after another fall while I was driving. I was like, I'm coming. Jeez. Yeah. And, so I met him there at the hospital, and lo and behold, he has blood clots in his leg, and he has a compression fracture in his spine. And I just say that to say, like, if you really listen to what people are saying when they describe their pain, you don't have to even touch them. You don't have to manually assess anything. You know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And that listening piece is, I think, one of the most important parts that I don't know why that doctor wasn't listening, but he wasn't. Or maybe he didn't have the experience to know what that meant. I don't know. Yeah. I never got my chance to talk to that doctor.
But the power of inquiry, right? Like when I teach orthopedic assessment, I talk about it all the time. And of course, I'm teaching this big, long, strung out acronym because that's what you're supposed to do. But the reality is, when we get into the inquiry, if you ask just a small handful of really potent questions, and most importantly, you listen, like really listen to the answers, man, you get a ton of information out of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, did that experience with your dad, did that at all influence any work that you do with the elderly, or is that kind of a separate thing?
I think it's something that I was doing before that time.
Okay.
But I think watching my parents age has really helped me understand the needs of an older person, that even though they may look strong and vigorous, they do actually have special their bodies can't handle these extra stresses that somebody younger could just, roll through. And actually, it was my dad's injury was the second of my parents' injuries. My mom actually broke her arm. She fell and broke her arm in May of 2020, and I was actually there with her. And everything I'd ever learned about first aid, it was gone.
Of course.
I
Yeah.
couldn't. I had no idea how to move her. And, funny thing, people who actually fall, they don't fall on their backs. So everything we learned in first aid about rolling somebody over from their back, no, it doesn't apply at all.
Yeah.
And moving an injured person is a nerve-wracking experience.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I had to move her because she was blocking the doorway. So it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, and watching her go from, on Sunday we were bike riding together. Monday she fell and broke her arm. And then on Tuesday I was helping her with basic getting up and sitting down. And, just the most simple things she couldn't do. And it wasn't that she was weak. It was that, the pain that she was in and the shock and the situation had created this thing where she needed all this help. And so then I think it was after that I started really focusing in on older people and working on the elderly and learning how to really treat and assess them more appropriately for their particular needs.
Yeah. I think that's important to consider. Different demographics have wildly different needs, and you go about it fundamentally different. When you do work with elderly, like what are some of the key tips that you've learned? Like what's some of the biggest differences between the elderly and, say, the general population?
Right. The first one is they can't always get undressed, or it's not practical for them to do so. So you do the treatment with them clothed. And that's actually one of the things I appreciate about the meridian massage is that, the whole thing was demonstrated, I think almost everything with someone clothed, which is great because, and some of them just don't feel comfortable getting undressed. You get an old lady who's 75 and she's never had a massage before. She doesn't want to get undressed.
Yeah, totally.
And a lot of them can't get on and off the table. So I've had to improvise a few things. For one client, I have to lower the table so she can just gently sit on it, and then she can lay down from there. But other people, I think the thing that I wasn't really aware of for the elderly is that they have a really hard time getting from a laying position to a seated position. So if you can avoid making them do that, or if they're okay with the effort, then that's fine. But sometimes it's just not feasible. And so then being able to treat people in a chair, and being able to treat people maybe just in different situations, whatever happens to be available. Like sometimes they'll be laying in bed and you just have to hurt your back a little bit for the hour, I had one client who was in a hospital bed, and she, oh my goodness, she loves her independence. And so she wanted to get into the bed and out of the bed and into her wheelchair, and I didn't know how to help her get in and out of her wheelchair. And she didn't really want help, but she really needed it. It was really complicated. And that's the part that can be complicated, is you're watching someone struggle and you're like, I'll just give you a hand. And they're like, no,
I got this. I'm fine.
I got this.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't think you got this.
Yeah.
But you have to be respectful and just say, yeah, I'm right here. I can give you an arm if you need it, a hand if you'd like. Just let me know what you need. And then most people are they really appreciate that, but then they also appreciate the ability to just do it themselves, I think. And I think the elderly are being told many times that they can't do things themselves. And when you let them do that, then it's affirming to them, of course. The other thing, the other thing about the elderly is that there's no rule as to how much they can do or how much pressure they can take, or you have to really communicate. You have to talk. Like my oldest client, I think, is 90 this year, And he loves a deep tissue massage, man. That guy, I'm impressed. He's like, I don't know how you're dealing with this, but
Yeah.
he's just like, yeah, this is good. This is good. He had a hip replacement back in the 90s or whatever. And he's had open heart surgery, and he's got a pacemaker, and he's got like, all these different things. But he is very much a fan of the deep tissue massage. But the real treatment that I do is just at the end. Well, I do sorry, deep tissue is a real treatment. Sorry. But it's a lot of muscle work, and muscle work I find is, of course, the one that stays the least amount of time. Like muscles will revert because the joint is in the same position, the bones are in the same positions relative to each other. The myofascial line hasn't really been affected that much unless you're doing something other than just muscle work. But at the end of the treatment, I will do a little bit of acupressure. Of course, I do it while I'm on his glute max there and glute med. But then when I flip him over, and it's funny that when I flip people over, that's when I actually do the work, when they're on their back. And then that is wonderful for the elderly because they have a hard time laying on their front. Most of them can't actually, they can lay on their backs, but they cannot lay face down. And if they do lay face down, then they get breathing problems and congestion, and it becomes a fairly large issue. This particular guy can lay on his stomach, but I think he's the only person past 70 who can that I've treated. Most of them are, I lay them side lying, and I work on them side lying at most. So that's a major thing that you need to understand. And it's great that most of the work is on the back. And so then the acupressure is from the hip down to the foot. So that's what I do for him. And
So it sounds like you combine techniques, but in a more gentle way. Like you said, it's hard to judge, right? Because every person's different, but nevertheless, you kind of shift what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at this point in time in your career, right, you've been practicing for a while, and you're fully booked, which is great. Not everybody gets to say that, so congrats on that. So the question I ask, which I ask everybody, is what do you think makes a successful practitioner? Maybe another way to conceptualize it is, what do you think makes a really great practitioner?
I mean, I already kind of touched on it. Listening. Asking good open-ended questions and just listening to the response and watching people's body behavior, like their body language will tell you a lot. Because they'll say, "Oh, my shoulder hurts." And you're like, "Oh, like, it's not here, it's here."
Yeah.
Or I mean, even more subtle things where they'll put their hands on their stomach when they're laying there, and you'll or how they breathe. And all these different things will give you a lot of information about how much pain they're in, where the pain really is, and how the treatment is going. Because people who are enjoying their treatment don't hold their breath that much, or if they are holding their breath, you need to ask, is this too much? Should I modify? Or you need to say, okay, exhale while I'm doing this. Because sometimes people hold their breath in an anticipatory way, because they're like, oh, this is going to be so intense. And in that case, I have to remind people, just exhale while I'm doing this intense bit. And then, so yeah. And
Listening and communication.
I'm all about the communication. Yeah.
So what's next? Like you've got a fair bit of education, different types of modalities under your belt, right? What's your current pathway? What's really gripped you as far as interest?
Well, my next sort of course of interest has been visceral manipulation.
Oh, super cool.
Yeah, I met an osteopath in Manitoba last time I was there, and she did some incredible work on my mom. My mom was having sciatic pain, and of course, I did some treatment for her on that. I just started the acupressure stuff, so I was going in, and then I looked up bonus points that you didn't cover, and I really talked to her about what was going on. And the interesting thing is some emotional stuff came up in our conversation that morning, and before I did the treatment, and so I kind of customized the treatment based on that. And then when she saw this osteopath in the afternoon, the osteopath had her lay on the bed, and she just did some really gentle work. And Mom said later, like, she could barely feel it. And she looks at me and she says, "Oh, is there like a lot of emotion around this?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah. There's a lot of emotion around this." And so she, so she did whatever, she did a lot of energy work at the same time. So it was like I could feel it just emanating, actually. It was really interesting to feel that much energy moving through the room. And then at the end of the treatment, my mom was, I would say, 2 to 3 inches taller. She has osteoporosis.
Yeah.
And she was dramatically, she's quite hunched, and she was dramatically taller and straighter. And I think what the effect of everything that the osteopath had done was to really restore the intra-abdominal pressure.
Right.
And so then the spine is able to lift. So I thought that was very interesting and really cool. And I've had some success in restoring core pressure and restoring that kind of thing, but like that was pretty dramatic. I was amazed. And
cool.
my mom's sciatica went away because the spine was no longer compressing that nerve root.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh. Super cool.
Yeah. So that I read the textbook from the Borealis Institute. So I had I had access to that first textbook, and I'm reading it and like, which direction do all the organs go? I'm trying to memorize it because I have to give it back, and I have to do this. So what I've been doing in my practice is basically just while I'm doing some diaphragm work, just putting my hand on people's abdomens and like listening, because I talk about listening in this course. And so I'm like, okay, what is the body telling me right now? Because I'm like, I can do that. I can listen to bodies. I do that all the time. This is just a different part that is completely ignored in all of the basic training for all massage therapists everywhere. And really strangely, but it is. And so then I'll be like, okay, well, their aortic pulse is further on the right, or it's further on the left, or I'm feeling a lot of tension. I feel like the stomach's not free, or I feel like this pulse is too strong, or, just little things like that. And then if I can feel like I need to nudge things, and I just, gently, and I'm ask people, this shouldn't hurt. So if it hurts, let me know. And then, I don't know if it's having a huge effect on the treatment, but I'm definitely able to learn that, your aortic pulse shouldn't be over on the left. Like, it should really actually be fairly central. So something on the left is dragging everything that way. So maybe we need to just with your breath, we're just going to restore that movement of the organs going up with the exhale and down with the inhale. And I think all of that is important for just restoring digestion and all of that stuff as well.
All the things. Yeah, it's remarkable. And what I find interesting about that is it's like any technique has systemic effects, and it's just another local technique that affects the entire system. So I think that's pretty cool direction to be going in.
Yeah.
So is there any place that people can either follow along with what you're doing, or get in touch with you, or if they've got clients they want to refer to you, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I do have a Facebook page. It's at Relief Massage Calgary. And that's an Instagram handle as well, and you can message me there. Nice. I'm not on social media much because my self-care is not to be there. My business care is to be there. So it's kind of hard. But I will eventually see the messages. Best is actually just to go to my website, which is www.reliefmassagetherapy.ca.
Great.
And I have a book now link, and you can just go in there, and I believe my phone number and email is on that site as well, as far as I recall.
I'll put all that information in the show notes, so if people want to, that's where they can find you. And I think that's a great place to wrap things up. So again, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me, and thanks.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Sure thing.